This is just to stimulate our thinking regarding something that I believe is happening in the churches. You could ask yourself, what is the measure of spirituality in the typical American church? How do you measure spirituality? I believe that what has happened is that spiritual maturity, and that's something that many people have a hard time defining. The way we define is the degree to which you have allowed the Holy Spirit to transform your thinking. That speaks of your spiritual maturity. Is immaturity, is that bad? That's a trick question. If you're a new Christian, spiritual immaturity is not bad. There's nothing wrong with spiritual immaturity. We don't look at a 3-year-old and say, you should be ready to drive a car. But a 15-year-old that is crawling like a 3-year-old that's wrong, isn't it? It's where you should be in comparison to where you are that makes maturity or immaturity negative. I mean, we just need to think of immaturity as a relative thing. As a Christian starts the Christian life, as a new believer starts the Christian life, it's only normal for that Christian to be immature, right? That's not bad. What is bad is when a Christian is 5 or 10 years old and still acts like a new Christian. And that's one of the things that we have going on when new Christians are not discipled. Many of them typically continue immature. It's like raising a child without ever really having care, guidance, then wondering why when they're 15, 20 years old, they can't make any kind of decisions. This is one of the problems that many kids in America have with finances. You know, that they're not taught how to manage finances at the appropriate age, and so then when they get out, they graduate from high school, they think that a credit card is just something you buy everything with a credit card. Don't worry about the long-range implications. How many Christians know all kinds of scriptures, and yet they're immature in their everyday Christian lives? Well, there's parallels between what's happening spiritually and what's happening in the rest of society. At the top of the page, I believe that it's true that spiritual maturity is typically graded on the curve. Now, what does that mean? If you're in a church and everybody is very immature and you're just a little immature, don't you feel pretty good about yourself? I'm ahead of those guys. What does Paul say about that? Paul has some words about that. Those that compare themselves or with others are foolish. When Christians go to the rewards ceremony, God's not going to congratulate you because you were more spiritual than Joe Blow over here. God knows where every believer is, and God holds you accountable for where He knows you are. He doesn't hold you accountable for how you are compared to somebody else. Now, what I believe is happening, and that's why the statement graded on the curve, is the same thing that's happening in our education system. As kids are dumbed down, a kid that would have been dumb 20 years ago now looks bright in comparison to the other kids. But the point is, the church is being dumbed down by the influence of the world. One of the things we need to do is disciple new believers and help them to get started so that they don't go through their Christian life comparing themselves to other people. Because if they compare themselves to other people, you're going to get a distorted perspective of where you are spiritually. God doesn't care where you are in relationship to somebody else. He cares where you are in relationship to where you should be. On the left-hand column is what I believe is happening in a typical church. And on the very extreme right-hand column is what I believe is the biblical perspective of the church. In the middle column, you see there's 4 categories. Now, nobody has any problem with the extreme upper category, the first row. These Christians appear to have wholeheartedly acknowledged His Lordship in their life be walking in fellowship with the Holy Spirit and seem to be bearing spiritual fruit. Everybody would agree we could all identify people that fit into that category, that seem to be healthy, growing Christians. At the extreme bottom, these individuals are usually recognized as being unsaved. We don't have a whole lot of problem being able to identify people that are unsaved. The problem comes in the two middle categories. And this can be a little bit deceptive, because from the church's perspective, if you gauge spirituality on church attendance, then a person can look healthy if that's the only criteria. And most leaders don't have time to delve into the spiritual condition of the typical individual in the church. And so church attendance is often the only criteria by which the spirituality of a believer is gauged. Certainly, church attendance typically shows a level of interest. And so I believe what is predominantly thinking is, if a person attends, they have an interest. If they have an interest, then they're going to profit from whatever is shared with them. That's good, but there's other criteria besides just attendance and just receiving. Now, probably everybody here heard the illustration of the Sea of Galilee and the Dead Sea. They both have input, but one is healthy and one's unhealthy. What's the difference? There are two seas, two bodies of water that both have input. One's healthy and one's not. The Dead Sea receives a fresh flow of input, but then it stays there, stagnates. On the other hand, the Sea of Galilee also receives a input, a fresh flow, but the water goes out. There needs to be an input and an output. Okay, there needs to be a flow of his life. And what is a believer? Did Jesus not say a believer is a branch? What's the purpose of a branch? It's a conduit through which the life of the tree flows and produces fruit. The branch does not produce the fruit. The tree produces the fruit. The life of the tree flows through the branch and produces the fruit. We are branches. And a healthy branch is a branch in which the life of the tree is able to flow so that there will be fruit. Jesus said, "By this is my Father glorified, that you," what? "Bear much fruit." The fruit that is produced by the tree in the spiritual sense is what glorifies God. When we talk about fruit in this class, we're referring to whatever the Holy Spirit does to your life. Kind of looking at the very left-hand column, I believe that many church leaders, I've heard this time and time again, church leaders are discouraged with the lack of spirituality in the congregations. I think it's safe to say there's probably more church leaders that are discouraged and frustrated with the spirituality or lack of spirituality of the congregations than there are church leaders that are thrilled. When's the last time you heard a church leader excited and thrilled about the spirituality of the congregation? It's not typical. The problem, I believe, again, is that the church body, the congregations in most churches, are spiritually dumbed down. The expectations are just going down and down and down. I think it's safe to say that the American church has little impact on the American society. And I believe that the reason is that the church is spiritually unhealthy. Okay, I believe I'm safe in saying that. And I believe that one of the biggest reasons for that is the lack of personal discipleship at the beginning of the Christian life. What was the Great Commission? Jesus said, "Go and make disciples." It was not go and make converts and then just let those converts go on their own. It was to make disciples. The expectation of a disciple is greater than the expectation of just being a convert. One of the characteristics of a disciple is spiritual reproduction. There's an expectation of a disciple that the disciple is going to make other disciples. And yet, how many people in the typical American congregation are even aware of the expectation of making disciples? Most Christians have awareness that I should be witnessing so that people will be saved, but very few Christians in congregations understand that they are supposed to be involved in making disciples, and yet that's the Great Commission. Jesus has said, you shall be witnesses, also said, make disciples. One of the main goals of this personal discipleship is to help the new believer to start following after the Holy Spirit and to be developing that relationship with the Holy Spirit, to be growing, to be maturing. And as the Christian grows, there is going to be an interest, a growing interest, an increasing interest in sharing with others. As you grow as a believer, how can you not care about others? In other words, as you grow, the Holy Spirit is going to put in your heart a care for others. If we gauge the spirituality of Christians on church attendance, we're missing it. You just cannot get an accurate evaluation of a person's spirituality by church attendance. All of us are aware of Christians that have attended church services for years often, and then all of a sudden something will come out that just blows you away. We're all aware of people that have appeared good if you just looked at the outward appearance. The point is that in our church environment in the U.S., a Christian can appear to be the top layer of their lives, and they can appear spiritual by attending Bible studies, by attending church services. That doesn't make a person spiritual. And yet that is typically the gauge of spirituality. So often we hear that, this couple's, they've been going to church for 20 years. Oh, they're getting a divorce. Well, wait a second. You don't get up in the morning and say, this is a nice day for a divorce. I haven't had one for a long time. Divorce is something that goes on for months and months and months. And Christians can be totally out of fellowship with God and attend church services and appear to be spiritual. And I just see this over and over again. Those are the kind of people that would be considered acceptable by most church leaders. And a description of these people would be, these Christians don't exhibit excessive negative outward behavior. These Christians may regularly attend church services, give financially, be involved in other Christian activities. They will quickly acknowledge God's presence in their life, but do not exhibit much passion for the Lord and understanding of wholehearted surrender to His Lordship. I believe that the majority of Christians fall into this category. You're not seeing spiritual fruitfulness, but they attend church. This, I believe, is rampant across the U.S. The third category down are the people that get sent to counseling. These Christians tend to exhibit questionable negative outward behavior, such as ongoing marriage, relational or financial problems, addictions, etc. They may or may not regularly attend church services or consistently give financially. They may be involved in some Christian activities. They will quickly acknowledge God's presence in their life. Counseling is often seen as a recommended recourse. Their salvation may be in doubt. In reality, I believe that second and third categories, from God's perspective, really are one category. But humanly speaking, the only difference is, one is that their sins are more visible, and the other group, their sins are not as visible. We have Christians who have a hard time hiding their problems. But then we have other Christians that are very good at hiding their problems. In reality, does God see a difference between the two? No. Do we see a difference? Yes. And so we can look at people that don't have outward problems, that are dominated by problems, that are not walking in the Spirit, but they can look healthy. See, I believe this is what's happening in the American church, and it tends to happen all over the world. We see it very evident in the American church in that there's many unhealthy Christians who appear to be healthy if you compare them to the unhealthy ones. In other words, if you look at second group and compare them to the third group, they look healthy. An unhealthy Christian that doesn't have outward manifestations of sin can look healthy compared to the Christian that is obviously having marriage problems, or obviously having relational problems, or obviously having other kind of problems. If you compare this person to this person, they can look healthy. But if you compare this group to the top group, now you have a different situation, see? I believe that this is what's happening in most Christian churches, is that many people that are considered healthy, they don't show any spiritual passion. We all know Christians that have no spiritual passion. They have very little impact. They're not witnessing. You don't see God in their lives, and yet they attend church services. And what can you say? You can't walk up to them and say, well, you're not very spiritual. You see what I'm saying? We need discernment in looking at other Christians. We need to be aware of what's going on so that we can help those Christians that want to grow. Okay? There's a lot of Christians that want to grow, and they need somebody to help them to grow. This is what we're looking for. The whole purpose of this discussion is to be able to identify what's going on so that we can help those Christians that want to grow.